Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, October 20th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Donald Trump's ground game and the failure on his part with a new outsourcing of his ground game to Elon Musk's super PAC, America PAC, that seems to now have data that internally reports that they have falsely claimed in 25% of instances, nearly a quarter of the doors that America PAC says that they have knocked on have actually found out to be potentially fraudulent, internally flagged by the Elon Musk team, by America PAC, that now has found its way to the mainstream media. And they've said that over the past couple of days, this is something that they are now actively working to try to combat. But at the end of the day, it is data that seems to have been falsified by members of the canvassing teams. And it's a ground game effort that will require a complete and total overhaul of those who currently exist in this position if it is to be done correctly, because after all, as of right now, 25% of what they seem to claim they have been door knocking at and for in these battleground states just simply doesn't seem to be reality. And that's a big problem for the Donald Trump team. I think when they look at this campaign and they look at where they are across the battleground states, they know it's going to come down to the wire. They know it's going to come down to who got their turnout done correctly, who got voters out mobilized, who got the enthusiasm gap secured, who was getting people to the polls in rather, a variety of different ways, whether that's early voting, voting by mail, voting in person on election day. There are so many different ways people can get out and vote. And that's the challenge here for Team Trump is that they have decided way earlier on that they were going to outsource their ground game for this election to Turning Point USA and to Elon Musk's super PAC. And that was a decision that very much seems, as of right now, to be a bad one in hindsight. Now, I want us to set the stage as to what actually happened here when it came down to the ground game efforts of the Donald Trump team leading into this election, because this is something that was very much foreseeable, but I want us to really understand exactly how foreseeable it was and what that really means about the election. What we know here is that Donald Trump's campaign team really is starting to do this autopsy. Republicans across the country, those outside of the campaign, are starting to understand what went wrong. How do we get to a point where 25% of our doors knocked in Arizona and Nevada are seemingly fraudulent? That people weren't actually knocking on these doors, that they were at a field office or at home saying that they were doing all of these things, saying that they were marking it, they're voting for Trump, they're voting for Harris, whatever it might be, doing things wrong, doing things right, whatever it is. We know that there's a bad thing going on when it comes down to door knocking and canvassing efforts on Team Trump, and so we can really unpack it here, as Republicans are really trying to do. And so it actually dates back a little bit earlier on to August. This was around actually June, July, August, so the time frame at which Biden was the nominee, Harris eventually became the nominee. This is an article published by the Washington Post on August 3rd, so right after Biden dropped out of the race, right before Tim Walz was chosen as the VP selection. So this was a time frame in which Donald Trump's team decided that they were going to join forces with a number of outside groups. On one end, it was Elon Musk's super PAC. On the other end, it was Turning Point Action, which is that Charlie Kirk organization, Turning Point USA. All of these organizations were going to be this new ground game strategy. They sold Donald Trump largely on this effort. And this is actually a big point of contention for the RNC. I don't know if you remember, but Laura Trump, a relative of President Trump, has decided that she's now going to be the RNC chair. She wanted to do it. Ronna McDaniel was forced out of the party by Donald Trump and his allies. And so Laura Trump became the co-chair of the Republican National Committee from that point. They pretty much got out everybody who would object to a decision like this one, where they were going to bring in Charlie Kirk and his allies prior to the 2024 election. Turning Point USA had zero to do with the ground game efforts of Donald Trump's campaign in 2020 and 2016. Had zero to do, Elon Musk had zero to do with how people were mobilized in previous elections. The RNC handled all of these things. Now they've decided to outsource it. And so did Donald Trump's team, which is now one and the same, given that the RNC is ran by a family member of the former president. And so Donald Trump's team, again, decided in August they were going to gamble on this new ground game rules, on this new ground game strategy, rather, for their campaign, and it was either going to pay off very well or it was not. But at this point, when they were making these decisions, they were running against Biden, right? This is something that came out August 3rd, but for weeks prior, months prior, we had heard these conversations were being had. People who are, privy to the information that needed to be known, to be told to the journalists, were leaking things to the press. Donald Trump's going to go to Turning Point. He's going to phase out all of the members of the mainstream GOP and opt for his own style of campaign this cycle because he knows or believes he's going to beat Biden there's no wrong way to do things. So why not integrate more factions of the party that can leave you a longer standing legacy? And so that's what Donald Trump tried to do. He tried to bring all these people, and we saw the warning signs. We saw it very early on. Turning Point USA has never ran a presidential campaign before. And so the fact is that them being handed the ground game and the mobilization efforts of what should be a robust strategy point from the Donald Trump team really goes to show that the political expertise of the Trump team probably isn't as strong as we otherwise might think, despite some of the numbers looking good for the former president. But as I was saying, the Republican Party had raised these alarms a bit earlier on, saying, this is something that's going to be a problem for us if it doesn't change between now and Election Day. And so far, it really hasn't changed. This is an article from September 30th, so not too long ago, but absolutely within a time frame to start questioning, is this ground game effort actually working? And again, at this point, there were no articles about fraudulent numbers, about, incorrect data submissions, about people who are supposedly working for the campaign not actually doing what they're supposed to do. The Republican Party raised the alarm bells. They were saying, Donald Trump's ground game really isn't what it used to be. And even if it's not necessarily, something that seemed to have been priority for the Trump team when they were running against Biden, it absolutely should be when you're running against Harris, and Democrats are at an all-time high when it comes down to campaign enthusiasm. And so Republicans raising these alarm bells absolutely mattered. It brought us to a point where, there were articles being written about it. Republicans were speaking to the mainstream media in an effort to potentially plead with that of the Trump team to really start to notice that, hey, something's going on with your ground game. You really need to get it up. They ignore it. And not only do they ignore it, there are other instances in which circumstances arise where it shows the ground game really isn't as strong as you otherwise might think. They're saying they're using these untraditional strategies to draw out battleground voters. They are essentially working against the playbook that won them the 2016 election. And actually, too, this is something, again, we've known for a while. Now people are raising even more alarm bells. But even recently, Donald Trump's ground game was undercut by slow internet that crashes the app that they use. This is the app that Donald Trump uses for his ground game efforts for people to register that they've knocked on doors, to sign up for turf, for all of these different things that are necessary, things that the Democratic Party has been able to refine and do very well because they've done it consistently on a similar platform. This is the first time a major presidential campaign is outsourcing their ground game efforts in such a poor manner, right? Whenever things are outsourced from a campaign, sometimes, for instance, a really good example of this is that sometimes presidential campaigns will make a decision early on, are we doing all of our advertisements in-house or are we outsourcing it to very strong advertisement groups? And that can usually be an indicator of, one, how much money they have at the time, but also two, what they think is the best for them. Do they have a more organic staff than paid people who are specialists in this field? Maybe, right? And so that's something that you can take away from that. It's not as important, I would say, who's making your ads as it is when it comes down to who's doing your ground game, because this is really what drives out voters. And so this is something that was written on October 14th. So this was 6 days ago. This was before the story talking about the 25%. This is before the story talking about, all these different things, even before this recent story that I just showed you from Rolling Stone that said Republicans are telling Trump that Elon Musk's super PAC is blowing it, and now we know for a fact that they are. And I think that's really going to be a major problem when it comes down to some of these battleground states. I remember, how ground game really made a difference in the 2022 midterms, and how Democrats getting out the vote earlier on was able to build up a firewall, as we, on social media, on election Twitter, whatever it is, like to refer to that buffer that one political party has in advance when it comes down to early voting, enough so that it can counteract any of the returns that we see across the state on the day of the election, because Republicans typically vote on election day, Democrats typically vote early. They vote by mail, absentee, whatever you want to call it. They are getting their vote cast earlier on. Republicans are waiting until election day. And so I think a big part of the problem here too is that when you are falsifying data, right? When you are saying, I knocked on this door, but I didn't, you are doing a major disservice to a campaign, because they're working under this assumption that this door was knocked on, these people have voted, that they can take them off their list, and it ceases future communication, right? It ceases another canvas from going up to that door and saying, did you actually vote? People aren't doing those things. And then when you mess up the data, and when you hire people that mess up the data, there's so many different reasons why this is just a wrong and bad situation for the Republican Party. And when it comes down to how you can be practical in a circumstance like this, how do you arise out of the ashes and build it back up, yada, 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 you have to think about it from this perspective. We are 16 days out from the presidential election. We are very close until election day. And so the idea that the Trump team can afford, or Elon Musk's super PAC, can afford to field full-time volunteers, full-time organizers, full-time canvassers in these battleground states to knock on doors, they have some bad apples. Very clearly, they see this revealed, and they talk about it internally, people who are falsifying canvassing efforts. When that team talks about that, and they have to make a decision if they're letting people go, they mentioned this in the article, if you want to read the full thing at length, they're worried that they won't be able to replace these canvassers in time right before the election. And that's a very valid point, right? On one end, you're looking at it saying, these people screwed us over, but if they were a year out, absolutely replace them. But 16, 17 days out, can you replace someone? Absolutely not. It's so difficult to do, and the idea that people can just upend their lives for politics in the final 2 weeks of a campaign just simply isn't going to happen, and it absolutely is not going to be worth their time. They're going to have to do a day of training. They're going to have to do a day of orienting. They're going to have to waste all this time, and so now, the Elon Musk super PAC is stuck in 2 battleground states with people who are falsifying data, according to their own report, who are not actually knocking on doors, and these are the people that they're going to have to stick it out and work with because of how close this election is. But I can't say that this is something we didn't see coming, right? Republicans raised this concern at the end of September. In fact, they talked about it way earlier on. This is something that many Republicans were apprehensive about from the very beginning, from those ongoing conversations from June, July, August. They were saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Don't go to Turning Point USA. Don't lean into this organization that has no electoral history. And when they actually did do any type of electoral campaigning. I said they never did a presidential campaign, but they did Senate campaigns, and I can tell you just how those states went. Nevada, Arizona, good examples of how when you outsource the get out the vote efforts, you have an intentional targeted effort from organizations like Turning Point USA, Democrats win. And so when you're falsifying data, Democrats win. Because what it means here is that in these states and in areas like Nevada, there is a very difficult very difficult reality the Republicans might have to face that maybe had they done something differently before the election, they would actually be able to win these states should they lose them, right? You look at it and you say, if Nevada is to be decided by the same margin that it is according to Catherine Cortez Masto, and again, just humor me for this point, because I don't know if Kamala Harris is going to win the state of Nevada by 0.8%, but assuming she does, you have to look at it from that lens. I'm Charlie Kirk. I'm whoever this is from Turning Point USA. I made this decision for the Republican Party to use my platform, use my campaign, all these things, and you lose. And you lose because you had all of these things that people were raising red flags about, that people had major concerns about. You had a report that you internally found out that some of your own staffers are falsifying data in Arizona and Nevada, 2 states that do matter amongst the most across the country. I think even matters more than some of the other battleground states we look at. These states really do make a difference. And when you make a mistake, like trusting Turning Point USA with circumstances like this, they practically ran Blake Masters' campaign. And Democrats, I'm sure, are glad that they did, because Blake Masters lost by 5. And so that is the reality, and that is the circumstance we work with when it comes down to the 2024 election. That maybe this could have been the time to shine for Elon Musk and Turning Point Action, but it simply was not. And when you have data points like this, it really becomes a problem. Because it isn't just that, voters are being knocked off as having voted or whatever that might, whatever damage that does, because it absolutely does damage, right? In Pennsylvania, you can see Republicans are still lagging Democrats when it comes down to early mail-in ballot requests. When it comes down in some of these other battleground states as to who is returning the ballots, states like Michigan and North Carolina, when the Democratic Party is able to tell who's returned their ballot versus not, you can more intensely target your message, right? You can focus on these voters who haven't voted. You can tailor your ending message to those independent voters that might be waiting because they're on the fence versus Democrats that get out the vote in the first week or on the first day of early voting, and you no longer need to say, I now need to be knocking on their door because they've already voted. Knock on the next door. Save time, save money, save resources. That's one part of it. Another part of it, too, is just simply speaking to the core of Donald Trump's campaign. There have been many moments in which there have been major missteps from the Trump team, despite their strong electoral, prominence right now when it comes down to the 2024 election. Given where Joe Biden is in approval, given where we have, in terms of the nation's view on things like the economy and inflation, in theory, a Republican should be doing well in this election based on those metrics alone. But they aren't, because Donald Trump is not the right messenger. He's not the right person to do it. And we're seeing that when it comes down to how his campaign conducts itself, how his campaign, focuses on getting out the vote, focuses on reeling people in, building out this big tent, just like Democrats have, that someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders can be in the same party as Liz and Dick Cheney. Weird reality, our reality, whatever it might be. But when you're looking at, all of these different factor points, there's a multitude of reasons why this race is close, and the common denominator is Donald Trump and Donald Trump's lack of political instincts. And this reveals yet again another instance where Donald Trump is choosing a group choosing an organization, choosing a person to run his campaign or to run wings of his campaign strictly because he agrees with them ideologically, but may disagree with them on how they conduct a campaign. Because as we know so far, it doesn't seem to be going too well. And so I'd be interested to see with the final margins in Nevada and Arizona to see if this might have made a difference. And I know we might be thinking nothing this seemingly insignificant makes a major difference. But it does when you're falsifying data. And when it does, when you aren't able to tell who actually was knocked on or not, you aren't able to tell how some of these voters have engaged with the supposed canvassers that went to their door that never actually went. Now, enough on the point of, all this conversation around the leak, around this report. Obviously not great for the Republican Party, but this election is still close. Donald Trump can still win, and he's pretty close to victory right now in comparison to where he was a month ago or 2 months ago. But the race is still very much a toss-up. 50-50 at this point, but Donald Trump may be lagging behind in about a week or two or on election night, given that he just simply can't mobilize the base like Democrats can, and the people that he's trusting to mobilize said base is lying to him and lying about the data that they're revealing, and now it's getting to the press. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.